Oh, I have to click on it? What the heck?
You don't have to do it now, but
Oh, well.
you can do it.
A little late. You said I had to click on it, and I did.
You have to share it with the class.
It's giving me something else. It's technology. Heck with that.
I know exactly that feeling. when people send me a link, oh, you need to check this out, and I click on it, it's like, I need to sign up for something. I'm like, no, get this away from me.
Yeah. Don't send me some other advertising to go some other place.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm signing up for.
Yes. I'm afraid I'm going to be hacked.
You probably already are hacked.
I am.
All right. Are we ready to do this?
I am.
Okay. We know.
As I check my Instagram first.
Yes. Please do.
Yes, by all means. Gotta get that squared away. You ready? Jeff is his name. That's good stuff to write down.
Write it down. Jeff.
It's not like we haven't known each other for a long time.
True.
Is it Jeff or Jeffrey?
Molly and my mother call me Jeffrey.
Oh.
I'm going to call you Jeffrito.
Wow.
That'll be a new one.
That's Jeff Winstead. That's what they used to call him.
Oh, really?
Latinos, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sure.
Jeffrito. Okay, So today we have our first Jeff guest.
Wow, that's
illustrious guest named Jeff Lindholm. Our first Lindholm as well.
Agreed.
Definitely.
Agreed.
He and his lovely wife Molly moved here 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that number is.
10
years ago.
Can it be umpteen if it's only 10?
No, it's not in the teens.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there a hard limit on umpteen?
I would think there would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's okay.
I would
almost a decade ago.
I would say 10 fits into umpteen.
Okay.
Jeff?
Now we know.
What's the truth?
Jeff's the math
what's the
person.
truth? I would say, based on how the word ends, teen, it would have to be a number between 13 and 19.
All right.
I'd agree.
Right.
I'd agree. I'm not a mathematician
So
like Jeff.
I have not been here umpteen years yet.
Okay.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. Well, you're working on it.
On his way.
Back to the point. Jeff's been here almost umpteen years.
Yes.
And
almost.
He's been a part. When he first got here, he joined a small group from our church, which happens to be in the small group that me and my wife led. So we had the pleasure of being in a small group with Jeff for some years, which was really awesome. We got to know him really well. We've spent a lot of time together over the years. We do ministry together in various capacities. And Jeff is on the teaching staff at Generations Church, which is a slight tie-in to why we brought him in today. Although, I mean, we'd love to hear Jeff talk about many, many things, but we have a specific tie-in, which is truth. He did a message in a series called God Is, where we talked about various attributes, right? And Jeff covered the one on truth, which was pretty heavy and pretty weighty. I mean, there was a lot of
solid.
Yes, it was good. It was very, it was awesome to listen to. And we'll definitely link to that. So once you finish this episode, you can go check out his message, or you can go the other direction. You can listen to that first so you get a little sense of who Jeff is.
Sure.
So one thing I know is that almost as soon as I met Jeff, I'm like, this guy needs a blog, or he needs a vlog, or he needs to podcast. Or I'm like, this guy is smart. He needs to start doing some stuff. And he started
as if to say he wasn't doing stuff based on
I mean, once you hear him start talking, you're like, yeah, where else can I listen to this guy? Right? That's what I mean. You know what I mean by stuff. And and then the rest of the stuff is like, come on, Jeff, that stuff doesn't count.
Yeah, gotcha.
No, he does some sort of mathy work or reporty work or something, and something with career-wise. And I'm just like, Jeff, forget that. Start a vlog. And I remember there was a specific blog that you referenced, right?
Yes.
Originally.
Yes.
It is
sheknows.com.
Right. And I encourage you to start
heknows.com.
He knows. Yes. He didn't do it, but he did eventually start a blog that he wrote like one post and
in defense of truth, you actually created it, Justin.
Yes, true. That's true.
Because you were doing a lot of stuff with WordPress, and he found the domain, and it's actually he knows SS. .wordpress.org or whatever it is.
SS. What does the S stand for?
Well, see, that was one of the things that I had to establish in one of my very first blog posts. Is why there are 2 extraneous S's at the end.
We need to get a link to that post, and we'll put that in the show notes.
It's still out there.
Yeah.
I haven't updated it in what, 7-8 years, something like that, but it's still out there.
So I'm continuing my efforts. Okay, so we started this podcast so that I could get Jeff onto a podcast.
Wow.
No, not really.
Wow.
But it's a good excuse.
That's fair enough.
It makes me feel important.
It makes Mark feel less important. Sorry, Mark. It was all about Jeff this whole time.
Not a concern. Truth be told, everybody that comes in here, we almost encourage them to start their blog. You know,
that's true.
People have a lot of information to share.
Yeah, it's cool, and everyone's perspective is so unique and distinct.
Yeah.
So all of that being said, we'd love to hear a little bit about you from you. Not just my anecdotal version of Jeff, but share a little about yourself. How tall are you?
I'm 72 inches tall.
Okay.
Nice.
Thank you.
That's a good round number.
What else you got?
I've mentioned it up on stage at Generations a couple of times. My degree is in mathematics.
Sure.
And many people don't expect to hear someone preaching with a math degree. They expect someone with a theological degree of some kind. I've never been to seminary, and so I was very surprised when Troy wanted me to start preaching sermons. I'm like, I'm not qualified. You need to have a degree. You need to have training to do all that stuff, right?
That was your thought.
That was my thought. Apparently, I was incorrect because he said, nope, you're going to be up on stage without all that stuff.
Well, so a little background.
And we're thankful to have you there, in all honesty. Yeah.
A little
the scripture
background.
you bring is refreshing, and just the way you do it. Yeah.
He'd been doing it for a while. Troy's like looking across the audience. Oh, that guy looks very handsome. And he looks a little bit like he has a math degree. I think we'll get him up here.
Valid point.
And you spoke in, other venues, and, there was a clear track record there. I feel like it's important.
Yeah. Back when I lived in Minneapolis, at the company I worked for, there was a Toastmasters club. And if you are not familiar with Toastmasters, it's an international organization that it gives people opportunities to speak publicly, and it gives them opportunities to develop leadership skills. And so I joined that club, and I was able to give several speeches and compete in a couple of competitions.
Neat.
So that's my public speaking experience. And then when I got involved in CR, Justin and Megan started putting me on the schedule to have speaking roles. It started out with hosting, just sharing a little bit of my experience for a couple minutes. And then I started teaching some of those lessons out of the curriculum. And Troy happened to be in the audience for several of those Fridays.
Sure.
And I can't speak for him, but he must have seen some sort of potential that had me get on his radar. And then he was also in the audience in 2019, I believe it was, or 2018, when I gave my testimony.
Oh, sure.
And that was when he approached me the first time and said, I think you're going to be up on stage on a Sunday to preach a sermon.
Neat.
And I blew him off completely because I'm like, oh yeah, thank you for the compliment. That's all I accepted it as. But little did I know he was actually serious.
Sure.
Your Troy voice was distinctly lacking in a Texas drawl.
I can't do it. There are only certain accents that I can do really well. And
all right, give him a different accent then. English accent. Tell him. You don't have to do that.
You're putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
That would have been a great segue for a British accent. You're putting me on the spot. Oh, you missed your chance there.
But don't you worry, Mark took that chance.
Yes,
I didn't do it as well, but
appreciate it, Mark.
Spot is a good word.
Spot. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not drinking any spots of tea.
Well, but
all right. So more about yourself. What else would you like to share, Jeff?
And then you chose not to join like Toastmasters when you came to this area? I mean, I realized there is one. I was just curious how that process worked.
I looked for Toastmasters groups, and there were a couple.
Okay.
It was just really difficult because they met at a time when it wasn't.
Gotcha.
It wasn't convenient.
No, that's fair enough.
And I don't know. Up in Minneapolis, all I had to do was cross the street in order to attend the club.
Sure.
Down here, I would have had to drive all the way down to Charlotte.
Yep.
And I'm like,
No, that's why I knew there was a group, not that I belong or anything, but I just,
Plus, he'd already mastered the toast, so.
Well, hey,
work in progress.
I was going to say, it's one of those things, have you mastered marriage? That would be like,
That's right.
have you mastered public speaking type stuff?
Right.
But yeah.
Always learning.
Yeah. He's a student.
I'd like to hear a toast by Jeff at some point.
Oh.
See if you really did master it.
I gave the toast at my brother's wedding.
Nice.
And people said I did a good job.
They didn't say you mastered it.
No, not by any means.
They said you're a toast good.
Toast adequate, maybe.
Toast adequate.
Oh.
Thank you for coming in and saving me.
As long as he wasn't toasted at the wedding,
That's right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah.
Or roasted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, anything else you'd like to share? Sky's the limit.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah. Favorite color?
Purple.
Mm-hmm.
I've been married.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because of the Vikings, right? Ooh, actually, that's a little tidbit.
So I grew up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I did.
Like Justin
And we
did.
did not know each other.
We were on opposite ends of the Twin Cities area.
Yeah.
So we had almost no opportunity to run into each other.
Yeah. And Molly as well.
Molly,
Your lovely life.
Yeah,
Lovely life.
Molly spent her entire. She was born and raised in Minnesota. She lived in Stillwater, which is on the east side of the Twin Cities metro area.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I grew up in Eagan before moving away and living in other places, but then we ended up back in Prior Lake, and that's where my family is now.
We've had some Egans on our show before. Oh no, that's a vegan. Sorry about that.
Yes. Wait, hold on. Which one is it?
Yeah. Wrong one. It was supposed to be a drum roll, folks.
Found it. It's the bottom right.
There you go. Nice job.
There.
Yeah.
That's our signal of where I crop it.
Okay.
Oh, man. That was something.
Yeah.
Don't push that button. Top left, never push it.
It would have been a good intro, I will say.
It would, yeah.
But
A little 90s, but
back to you and Molly.
yeah.
You met in that area? I met in school, correct? College.
We met in college.
That's right.
We attended Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin.
There you go.
Yes. So the first time I ever laid eyes on her was in Summerton, South Carolina. It was during our spring break crew trip
Oh, cool.
to a 4-H camp called Camp Bob Cooper.
Nice.
She's a year older than me, so she was part of the varsity team, and I was still just a freshman novice. And
Doing what?
doing rowing.
They couldn't see my...
Oh, that's right. It's not a video podcast.
Exactly.
Justin's over in his chair just doing a rowing motion with his arms, looking at me with this kind of half grin on his face.
I was trying to tee you up. And...
So yes, both Molly and I were on the crew team, which is rowing the sport. And like I said, she was a year older than me, so I wasn't in a good position to get to know her my freshman year. But I did notice her, and I thought she was very pretty.
There you go.
But then the following year, we were still both on the crew team, and since we were both on varsity at that point, I had more opportunities to talk to her, flirt with her, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Even all these years later, you still think she's pretty. So that's a cool thing.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I say that based on the fact that we're in a small group together now. So like I say, it's not that, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jeff and I have some experience that goes
Jeff
not
gets
back
around.
as far. Yeah.
Well, don't say it like that.
You have experience with Jeff as well, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to share some of his dirty laundry?
Nah.
Okay. I won't either.
Not my thing.
I already did. He didn't start his blog. Well, no, he did. I started a blog. He posted a couple times.
Yes.
That's the dirty laundry I got. So.
No.
Not too dirty. Not too bad. Anything else you'd like to share, Jeff?
People often ask me what I do for work.
Yeah. What do you do for work?
The company I work for is Voya Financial, and it's difficult to explain what I do in a single sentence because people always kind of look at me like, what does that even mean?
They're those little orange bunny rabbits, right?
The origami dollar bills.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It used to be an orange ball when it was ING, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
ING sold off its American holdings because they wanted to consolidate just in Europe, and we were bought out by Voya Financial at that point.
Gotcha.
So I work with data in order to build reports for our internal business partners so that they can manage their lines of business effectively.
Nice.
Yeah.
So they know who to fire.
No, hopefully it doesn't come to that, but
Cool. So you do logarithms, basically, figuring things out along that line. Statistics.
not
Cool.
really.
Okay.
So
I was way off.
They're
Wait.
the primary business areas that we support are call centers.
Okay.
And so we have systems set up that record all sorts of call information, when a call comes in, when it ends, which directions this call goes. And then my job is to take all of those disparate pieces of data and consolidate them into a view of some kind that communicates something important so that a manager will see, are we successful in meeting our customers' needs? Which customer service representative needs more coaching to be more effective in his or her position, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. Depending on the view.
Depending on the view, yeah.
Sure.
It's a pretty good segue.
Yeah.
Take all these pieces of data, disparate pieces of data to, what was the rest of it? Build a view.
Create a specific view.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue to truth. Like what we'd like to discuss. So again, talking about the message or kind of the tie into this is that you give a message on truth, and that's one of the primary characteristics that we would define God as, which was pretty cool. It was a great message. But so like one thing that thing you just described sounded very much like what you did in that message, where you took all these disparate pieces of information and compiled them together to create a view of who God was, right?
Yeah.
This truth, right? Truth is the view. And like your pieces of data, all the disparate pieces of information don't just equate to that one view. You could also compile them to create another view to define a different characteristic, right? And in the same way, that series was kind of doing the same thing, compiling these disparate pieces of information to create a view of God and truth. And what was some of the other characteristics? Do you remember?
Troy preached that God was knowable.
Knowable.
And
Crickets.
what was this other one?
We'll get back to you, folks. So today we're talking about truth in this particular view. So we have a few questions for Jeff. The first one being, what is truth? And I also ought to mention this. There was a listener request for this topic by Judge Jason Disbro. Yeah. So he's going to know what you have to say. No pressure, but a lot of pressure, because the judge is going to base his version of truth on what you say. So you could have a lot of lives at stake here. Okay. But no pressure.
You are not helping me at all. Before this podcast started recording, I sat down very tentatively, and everyone's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm nervous. It's just a conversation." Yeah, but I'm being recorded.
There you go.
And now you're telling me that lives hang in the balance.
That's
Thanks, Justin.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Not fragile lives, though.
Right.
Not fragile lives. Okay, all these lives are pretty well healthy people. You're not gonna necessarily sway them one way or the other. So just that part you can relax about.
Okay, I'll try.
Sure.
You got this. So what is truth in your view?
That is one of those very deep questions.
That's why we invited you.
Yeah.
But it's one of those questions.
Because we've sandbagged on this issue for a while, I'll be honest with you.
I kind of got that impression.
Yeah.
Justin was saying, we've been wanting to talk to this for a long time. Yeah. We just haven't.
We called in the troops.
So it was neat because when you and I happened to be sitting together when Jeff preached that Sunday, did we not? Were we not sitting together? Yeah. Yeah, we were sitting together. So it was like we both kind of clicked in that moment.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, yeah, this is a good person to just address this topic with. Because it's like, who can you ask? You know, and we thought of different people, of course, and a judge is a good thing. But then it's like there was a person up on a stage talking about it. It's like, okay, that's our guy.
Well, please don't.
You volunteered as tribute. You just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Was volunteered. Please don't consider me an expert because...
we appreciate your value, your viewpoint. And that's why we do How We See It.
Yeah, and that is why we call it How We See It. It's kind of our little disclaimer, like, this is from my perspective, and we understand that it is limited to my perspective, and that's okay.
Sure.
And we're about that, so.
Sure. So, I knew you were going to ask me that question, so I tried to preemptively come up with a response. And there are different ways that I can answer it. I mean, should I answer it as a lay person? Should I answer it as a philosopher? Or should I answer it as a Christian?
Yes, of course. All of the above.
All of the above. So a lay person might say, truth is what conforms to objective reality. Mm-hmm. A philosopher would say, oh, it has to be knowable. It has to be discoverable. It has to be applicable across time, across cultures, and go into detail on all of those things. As a Christian, I would say that God is truth, and that was the subject of my sermon. And because God is the embodiment of truth, he is the definition of truth, anything that comes directly from God is also truth, and that would include his Son, his Spirit, and the words that he says, because the words that God speaks come from his heart and his mind, which again are truth.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah, that's
well
good.
Said. Yeah, and I think so often. I think Justin and I were talking earlier. So often, I think I think it's more as we have to separate those two. I think that separation is almost more of a new experience. You follow me? As truth has become more relative, we have to divide it off. And I think there was a time when historically speaking, those weren't so far apart. Mm-hmm. I think there was more of a spiritual realm to who people could be. There was this acknowledgement. And I think as we've, divided that somewhat, it's become more difficult, and we've had to divide truth from science, maybe even as you shared about the philosophy type, dynamic. Is it provable? Is it something that I can manufacture, routinely? And I think, that's a more recent phenomena as far as I'm concerned of how truth has become more relative as we see it. We've had to divide that more and more. Mm. And you can rebut that by all means if you want. I mean,
it sounds like you're describing postmodernism.
Sure.
The philosophy of postmodernism.
Sure.
Which became popular in the mid 20th century. And the thesis statement, if you will, is that ultimate truth does not exist. All truth is relative.
Sure.
And so truth is what you make of it, essentially. But even though we attribute that to postmodernism, which is only 70, 80 years old at this point.
Sure.
It's actually far older than that.
Fair enough.
There was a portion of my sermon that I ended up cutting for time where I talked about Jesus' interaction with Pontius Pilate in John chapter 18.
Sure.
Where Jesus says, okay, Pilate, you say that I'm a king, but it is for this reason that I was born and came into the world, to testify to the truth.
Sure.
Anyone who is on the side of truth listens to me. So Jesus is saying, I am the standard of truth. And Pilate is recorded as basically blowing a raspberry and saying, what is truth?
Sure.
So this idea that there is no ultimate standard of truth and truth is relative goes all the way back to ancient Rome.
Valid point.
It's recorded in Scripture. And Pilate turned his back and walked out to the Jews, turning his back on the ultimate standard of truth, who was able to answer his own question.
Sure.
What is truth? And he just let that hang. And it's just, it's one of the biggest disservices to humanity ever recorded, in my opinion.
Sure.
I wish he would have stayed to listen to Jesus answer that question.
No doubt. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. This is the good stuff we get that didn't even hit the sermon.
That's
so I like that too.
This
is the cut version.
That's right.
Of
the B-roll. I mean, A-roll, and the message was B-roll. It wasn't as good as this stuff. So
there you go.
No, I love in the message though that so basically you just made some claims, right, about truth. Specifically, God is truth, right? Like that's a significant claim, and if you don't believe it, then that changes everything, right? So it's kind of a top-down understanding of truth. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that message is you validated the claims based on what we have available to us. And again, I would definitely recommend going to listen to it, because it especially if you do struggle with doubt about God being truth and that being a valid claim, I definitely recommend you listen to it, because it is great. It definitely helps to draw the picture. And now after that, if you disagree, that you'll have a very clear picture of what it is we believe and why we believe it, and why we're so drawn to it, right? But yeah, I definitely recommend that. But I think what we're getting at is this idea of relative truth, and it was postmodernism. Now it's just your truth, my truth. I think that's your truth, man. And I think without a central truth, like a universal central top of the food chain type of truth, then you only have that option. You're only left with that postmodern version of, there's only relative truth, because there's only what I perceive as truth in comparison to what you perceive as truth, in comparison to what Mark sees as truth. That's all we have, because the deer, their opinions don't matter, right? Like the aliens, maybe their opinions matter because they created us, but we don't know that, right? So, so we're left with just all these viewpoints into what we perceive as truth, and which one's actually true. It gets super fuzzy, and so it's no wonder that this is kind of where it's at, or it's kind of where we gravitate to without an acceptance of that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
In studying apologetics, it's one of the things that apologetics teaches you to do is to point out where opposing worldviews go awry. Sure. And with all truth is relative, ultimate truth does not exist, or if it does, it's not knowable. It's a self-defeating claim, because you can always ask, is it absolutely true that there is no absolute truth? Because if you say, no, it's not true, then you can't even put out the claim that truth is relative. But if you admit, yes, it is absolutely true, then you have defeated your own claim. So ultimate truth does exist no matter what you believe, and it is knowable. Even by saying there is no absolute truth, you've proved it. And so you can never really truly get away from the fact that ultimate truth does exist and it is knowable. It's just where you go from there that kind of shows the attitude of your heart, I would say.
Sure.
I think that there's a good tie into one of the things I wanted to reference was in that message. Again, you use math at one point, right, as a kind of a way to validate a certain claim or whatever. And I just thought that was so interesting, not just because of that particular illustration you made, but math is one of those things that is universally accepted as truth, right? Like those, you cannot disprove 1 + 1 = 2. No matter how many times you put one apple next to another apple, it never turns into 3 apples, right? It's 2. You can't. It's silly to even think about it being something different, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit of your perspective on how math and truth, like just any thoughts you have on that. But I think that's fascinating.
He's got some thoughts.
I do. because it reminds me of why I went down the math track to begin with. And I can remember it was back in my sophomore year of high school. I was taking an English class, and we were reading Of Mice and Men. And there's it's been years since I've read the book, and it's probably been years since you've read the book too.
I've not read it, so.
Well, there's a character in the book named Curly, and the two main characters, they are working on this farm, and Curly is like the foreman of the farm, something like that. And it says in the book, his name is Curly because he had tight curls in his hair. And so my English teacher was quizzing us on our reading comprehension, and one of the questions was, why is his name Curly? And so I said, it's because of his hair. She marked the question incorrect. So
She's one of those.
She was one of those. So I went up to her desk with my book in hand, and I quoted the passage directly from the text. And I said, why did you mark this incorrect? And she said, Jeff, he's curly because he's short-tempered. He's curled up, just ready to break. And I said, what a crock of crap. And I realized with math, it is absolutely true. Either it is 1 + 1 is 2, or it is not. And it's easy to prove things based on what has been established as irrefutable. Sure. And I said, I am going to go with truth because it makes sense. And so from that point on, I really didn't care about my English classes. I was more focused on math and science because you can actually argue tangible points and it's not arbitrary.
Right.
You're not walking into a world of unknowable things where you can argue anything, and as long as your argument is persuasive, it's true. There are lots of arguments that are persuasive that are complete bunk. And I just... Yeah, so
I can identify. I always thought that I wrote better papers than my grades reflected. Yeah, so I appreciate that appeal to be able to say, it's either right or wrong in math, it's not so subject. Yeah. But not that I don't appreciate good writing, of course, but absolutely. Still. Yeah.
And so that was just why I gravitated toward math as a mental discipline.
Yeah. So in that being true, that there's this whole segment of our knowledge that we can attribute to truth, right? Like we can say 1 + 1 always equals 2. I mean, even that, right? Going back to the relative argument, every truth is relative. Well, then why can't we get away from that, right? Like, why can't your version of 1 + 1 = 3? Because there's still always 2 apples, like, So, again, I think that I love your point. I mean, that's, I can't wait to use that in the future. Like, it's just disproving itself. But I mean, I think there's also very clear definitions of truth out there that also debunk it, to just say, well, what about 1 + 1 = 2? How is that how can you say that is relative? To which I think maybe there could be an argument. They would make the argument, no, we just all agree. I don't know.
It depends on the consequences, because you can make you can make any truth claim you want, but what are the consequences of it? Putting a truth claim out there is laying a foundation for other things to be built on top of it.
Sure.
And so if you put out a truth claim that's easily falsifiable, you're building a structure on something that is a foundation that is warped or cracked. And so the worldview you attempt to construct will eventually fall down in on itself.
Sure. Yeah. If it's not based on truth.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes about truth is Marx. What do you always say about truth? All truth is...
Oh, do I say?
You do.
I say truth has 3 sides.
Oh, I don't know if I heard that one. That one, I might like that one too.
There's yours, mine, and the truth.
Oh,
because I believe when 2 people come together,
that one's come up in this podcast.
Yeah. In a
your truth, my truth, and the truth.
Yeah. Because I think we can both, in a conversation based on the fact, that's what it is a conversation. I think there are aspects when we both see something, we don't necessarily see it perfectly. We see it from our vantage point. So therefore, when you and I see something, we both have aspects of that. If it were recorded, for us to rewind and watch, we would likely both have some truths, but ideally that recorded or the actual version would actually be the truth.
Yeah.
And so that's where that line comes from. And I think, that comes out of my background working with people who see things so differently, where that truth, where there again, it becomes, well, that's my truth, versus my spouse's truth that can be or can appear to be so different. And like you say, that's just the way, we operate, and why testimonies aren't necessarily always accurate, all that good stuff. But yeah. And I'm drawing a blank on the other one.
We'll come back to that real quick.
You can make a segue however you desire from there.
No, this is great because that kind of ties back to Jeff's statement about what are the consequences to your version of the truth. And I think what happens in those conversations, because you said if you played back the recording, right? So the recording is truth, right? We'll call that the truth. And depending on the level of consequences I've attributed to my version of the truth is often dependent on how much I see my version of the truth in the truth.
Sure.
Right? So like you could play back the thing and say, see, it's exactly what I said. And the other person goes, no, what are you talking about? It's exactly what I said, right? And interestingly enough, they're both looking at the same truth and coming to different conclusions because of the consequences they've attributed to their version of the truth, right? Like if I'm wrong, she's right, and therefore it crumbles my position over here, right? And vice versa. And I think that's a perfect example of like we build truths on these faulty foundations, and often the idea of rebuilding our truth on a different foundation is insurmountable many times, to where we cling and we cling and we cling. In CR, Celebrate Recovery, we call that denial, right? Like it's like we have to have this be true because any other version is insurmountable. It's imperceivable to rebuild everything I built my life on this version of the truth and say, but it's the foundation's wrong. I got to tear down and rebuild on the correct thing. And so I think sometimes getting someone motivated and committed to the truth is a much bigger task, as you've experienced in counseling, than you would think of just showing them the footage. Like, look, it's right there, black and white, very clear to see, and yet we still come to it with our clinging, right, in those consequences that we built. I don't know. I just think that's super interesting, and yet, a lot of times the best way to dissolve that is to have those softer, how I see it conversations, right? To be able to say, let's talk about, why do you see it this way? And being able to share about how I see it, which is what this podcast is about, Jeff, is our idea of like, let's soften these subjects by talking about it from a relative truth perspective, right? Like, I understand I don't hold all the truth. I understand that I have a particular view from a report Jeff built for me, right? Or Justin built for me, right? Like, I have a particular view into the truth. And that view, I feel pretty solid on it, but I recognize that it is not the truth. It's a view into the truth. And then at the same time, Mark has his view as well. And the goal is to be able to have these conversations that peer into the truth from two perspectives, which broaden our full view of the full truth. And, we found over the years, like, we're very like-minded, so our view is a lot closer to the truth, similar view than maybe we'd like, but it's great. And that's why we have other people on, is because now we have 3 positions coming at the truth. But yeah, so I think that, in terms of those conversations and counseling or whatever, right? A lot of times it's about softening those consequences to say, let's lower the
because like Jeff
bit.
was saying, if my truth is partly based on fallacy and I'm willing to admit that actually softens me to another person's viewpoint, and I'm able to see it in a broader perspective. And I think part of the reason, and you can push back against this, Jeff, I think part of the reason that we come back to saying there is a God is because we can recognize that so often I only have a facet that I'm viewing of truth in comparison to who God is. Mm-hmm. That there's such a broad perspective. If push back again, correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of thing, but it can, I would see it in a concept that truth is so big, God is so big, that in some ways my truth of who God is can very much be relative at times, because there's so much to see from different perspectives, but being able to recognize that there is one truth that's so much bigger than all of us, or we came from. I think that you used it in a hierarchical sense. Yeah. To the degree of being able to recognize ultimately truth is self-sustaining. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, we need to rely on it. I apologize. You had authority? Was the authority
different levels of authority? Yeah.
Yes. If you don't mind, you can probably make what I was trying to say more succinct by all means.
I made a brief point that we accept something as true when it is validated by a higher yes. state of authority.
Sure.
So the reason why our local leaders have mm-hmm. authority to make decisions that are binding to us is because they get their authority from a state level authority.
Yes.
And the reason the state has its authority is because it is validated from above by a national authority. And our founding fathers understood that national authority had to be accountable to something even higher. Mm-hmm. Of course, in modern times, we're getting away from that, and it's having pretty devastating consequences. But human beings, we kind of naturally do that. We don't accept something as true when it's validated from below. Mm. I suppose there are always counterexamples, but those counterexamples are very few and far between. We are very reluctant to accept something as true from a source that we consider inferior. Mm.
I think of that saying from the mouth of babes. Mm-hmm. I think, that becomes, is that kind of like what you're equating to? It's hard to accept some truth if it's someone who we see as being less than or younger at times, mm-hmm. But yet they see the world in such a different way, children. I mean, Jesus acknowledges, mm-hmm. How important that childlikeness, that childlike view mm-hmm. of faith is. And I think that's an important thing. But
Jeff said there's very few examples of where mm-hmm. truth from below is accepted. And I think I immediately think the only examples that come to mind are Jesus validating truth from a lesser source, right? Mm-hmm. Children saying, let them come. They have faith like you don't understand. Like your faith should be like theirs, right? Or the woman who gave everything with just her little coin, mm-hmm. or like many examples, he validated someone that no one cared about and said, they have the truth. Listen to them, right?
But in those examples, what was the ultimate truth that Jesus was affirming? It was the truth from God the Father.
Sure.
He was essentially calling out, you have your version of truth that you are trying to validate from below to apply to God and the ultimate tapestry of truth as we see it. And Jesus is saying that's incorrect. If you let God validate his own truth, which is the ultimate truth, you will see how these children are correct in this instance. Or that woman who gave everything she had with that tiny little copper coin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if I may then, I'm not sure that Justin and I got right. How do you see those? What are those areas where you do see it coming from below up? Can you give me an example?
Where it's valid?
Yeah.
That a lesser authority. I guess it would be probably those examples where, out of the mouths of children and childlike faith.
Okay.
It's hard for parents to say, my child is speaking truth right now because my child is young, not educated,
Sure.
Doesn't have a lot of experience, not a lot of wisdom, but it is still possible for a child to speak truth.
Sure.
And with the correct perspective, if you recognize that the words coming out of this child's mouth validate God's word from above,
Sure.
then it does, with that perspective, it does flip things. In this instance, my child is invoking truth from a higher authority that now beats mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I wanted to make sure we were on the same page with that thought. But yeah. And then as you shared, it maybe to that degree, what becomes your bigger concern when you see a government that doesn't acknowledge God?
I would say it comes down to accountability.
Okay.
If you are accountable to a higher power, you're going to essentially police your own behavior. One of the reasons why we don't break the law is because we fear the consequences of breaking the law.
Sure.
If we get caught, we know we will be punished, we will be held accountable. But if you destroy God or pretend he doesn't exist, then the government is the highest authority in the land.
I hear you.
They determine what is right and what is wrong, which means they can then write legislation that makes them always right, regardless of what they're attempting to do.
Sure.
And they're not accountable to anyone else. And we've seen throughout history when governments do that, the citizens always suffer.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, and I'm mindful, as like you say, as we march, I should say, or walk further from being able to acknowledge, as a culture, I'll say, start tearing things down, if you will, that kind of have that crosses and, that spiritual, I guess would be a good, or God image in them, as we start to tear that down, we can see how some of those things, and that becomes your concern, is ultimately how people who are created in God's image are ultimately treated by those in power. That becomes the bigger concern for you in that dynamic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
I was curious on your personal view.
Yeah.
And in those concerns. Yeah.
Kind of what you were alluding to with our government is like, it's fading from those original intentions in the sense that now we say the authority is the people more in a token fashion than in true fashion, where I think originally it was really meant to be as, true as possible that the legislation or legislators were completely accountable to who voted them in, where now there's so much, we've been playing the game for 200 years, right? So they've gotten it down pretty good to where, knowing how to work the system, play the game right to where you can get to the top without necessarily being accountable to the people who voted you in, right? And some of that is, going back to truth, right? Some of that is, covering the truth, fudging the truth, there's a lot of, or compromise, right? Like saying, I will do this for you. And then you get into office and saying, well, I can't really do that.
Right.
I never really could, but I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say the other side is now preventing me from doing this. Right. So there's a lot of like manipulation of truth, and to where if we don't have, and here's the thing too, like even the people being the highest authority is problematic. And I would say it got us into this, right? Like we vote for our favorite person and they're going to save the day. And, we made that decision as a people and it turns out, they're not as great as we thought they were when we voted them in, right? So even us as the people in trying to normalize it across all types of people like we try to do in America, right? Where everyone gets to vote. So you kind of have this, I'm not going to think of the vocabulary word, but I'm sure Jeff has it to say, where it kind of all just comes together and you kind of come up with, have legislators who represent all types and kinds or whatever. Even that is faulty to the degree that you can see where our country has diverged from the original intentions, and you can see a lot of corruption and stuff.
Yeah. Pure democracy is just government by mob rule. Because in a pure democracy, whichever demographic comprises 50% plus one makes all the decisions. And if... How do you gather 50% plus one? Do you do it by force? Do you do it by coercion? Do you do it by eliminating the competition? That there are lots of unethical and terrible ways to achieve the majority. And once you have it, you'll never lose it. And so if we go by pure democracy, eventually some unsavory demographic, whatever that might be, will get power, and then they will never lose it. And that's a problem. If there is no accountability higher than the government, that's a real problem for the citizens.
Yeah. So, ultimately, again, the problem is no matter what version you choose as your highest priority, it's problematic until you go all the way to the top, right? And for us, it's very obvious what that is, and, it's God, and it's very clear. But if you don't have that, how do you figure that out? Like, how do you appeal to a higher authority?
That's very difficult. So is your question sort of someone who denies the existence of God, how would we convince them that it's important to have a government that is accountable to a higher power?
That's a great question.
That is a question among so many, right? But start with, you know what I mean? Like,
this is where your theology background.
My expansive theology background.
It's okay, I don't know.
This is how you see it.
I don't know, but I think one of the important things to study is history. Because unless you learn from your previous mistakes, you are destined to repeat them. I forget who said that, but it's one of those maxims that is true and true and true and true over and over, where we lose so much knowledge that we could have accumulated if we refuse to study history. And we can see how when the government rose up and said, there is no God, we are the highest authority. We determine not just what is legal and illegal, but what is right and what is wrong.
Sure. What is moral?
Right.
Morality.
We have seen millions of people be murdered, not by foreign invading armies, but by their own governments. And innocent civilians, not soldiers, were sacrificed on this ideology. We saw it in the expansion of communism throughout the Soviet Union and in other countries. We see it in more modern dictatorships. We saw it, back in the Middle Ages when monarchs ruled with an iron fist and said, I'm not accountable to God, and I'm going to essentially eliminate everyone who doesn't worship me, essentially. We can see the pattern repeat itself over and over and over again, but only if we study history.
Sure.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.